She said it with a half-smile. It's nice having a real man around. I laughed it off, but the way she looked at me after, I couldn't. It was late afternoon when I first saw her struggling with the grocery bags. The sun was starting to dip, the light turning that mellow gold that softens everything it touches, even the old stairwell of our apartment building. She was trying to balance 2 paper bags against her hip, keys dangling from her wrist, one slipping dangerously close to tearing. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe the quiet way she sighed when the bag tilted, a sound that didn't quite fit the confident woman I'd occasionally passed in the hall. Whatever it was, I heard myself say, "Let me help you with that." She looked up, surprised at first. There was a flicker of hesitation, that small, self-sufficient pause of someone used to doing everything on her own. But then she smiled, a little embarrassed, a little relieved, and handed me the bag. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice had that calm depth some people have, low, even, but with warmth that lingers after the words end. The air between us smelled faintly of rain and citrus detergent from the laundry room downstairs. When she moved past me toward the stairs, I caught the scent of her perfume, subtle, something floral but grounded. Jasmine, maybe. The bag was heavier than I'd expected, full of fresh produce, bottled water, a loaf of bread that had left a small dusting of flour on her sleeve. I followed her up, watching how the late sunlight caught the edges of her hair. There were hints of silver in it, not from age exactly, but from the kind of life that doesn't waste time pretending. As we reached her door, she turned with a polite smile. "You didn't have to, I know," I said, smiling back. "But it looked like you could use an extra hand." That earned me a quiet laugh, small but genuine. She unlocked the door, pushed it open, and nodded for me to follow. "Just set them on the counter, if you don't mind." Inside, her apartment felt calm. Lived in, warm. A soft candle burned on the table, something vanilla and comforting. The hum of an old refrigerator filled the silence between us as we set the bags down. When our hands brushed over the same handle of a grocery bag, it was nothing, and somehow everything. Just a second of skin against skin, the lightest touch, but it carried a strange current through the air. We both noticed it. Neither of us mentioned it. She thanked me again, her smile lingering this time, not out of politeness, but curiosity. And in that small, unassuming moment, with the sound of rain still whispering outside and her eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat too long, I realized something simple: this was going to stay with me. I didn't know why. I just knew that helping with the groceries had suddenly felt like the start of something I couldn't quite name. She insisted I stay, just for a moment, said I looked like I could use a glass of water after carrying all that. I didn't argue. The truth was, I didn't want to leave just yet. Her kitchen felt like stepping into another rhythm of time. Everything was simple but intentional, the way her curtains filtered the afternoon light into soft, pale gold, the faint hum of a small radio tucked near the window playing something old and slow. There was a vase of half-wilted daisies on the counter, and a few recipe books stacked beside a fruit bowl that actually held fruit, not keys or unopened mail like mine. "Here," she said, handing me a glass. Her fingers brushed mine briefly, and though it was only for a second, the warmth of her skin stayed. I leaned against the counter as she began unpacking groceries, and somehow I found myself helping, lifting items from the paper bags, placing them where she pointed. She moved gracefully, but with the kind of efficiency that comes from habit. Watching her, I realized there was something quietly magnetic about her, not loud or showy, but in the way she seemed at peace with herself, even in silence. We talked about nothing at first. The weather. The unreliable elevator. The bakery down the street. Her laugh, low and unhurried, filled the kitchen like music. Each time it came, I found myself smiling without meaning to. At one point, I reached to set a jar on the upper shelf, and she reached at the same time. Our arms brushed, the faintest slide of her sleeve against my forearm. She murmured a soft, "sorry," but neither of us stepped back right away. For that suspended second, I could feel the warmth of her body near mine, the delicate scent of her perfume mixing with the sharp tang of oranges from the grocery bag. The sound of the rain outside deepened, a soft percussion against the window. She glanced at it and sighed. "It's nice, isn't it? The quiet after the rain starts." "Yeah," I said, watching the way the light framed her face. "It feels slower somehow." She smiled at that, and something in her expression shifted, a small, almost unguarded softness. We finished unpacking the last few items, and she leaned against the counter across from me, hands loosely folded. "You didn't have to stay and help," she said. "Most people would have just dropped the bags and left." I shrugged lightly. "Most people don't have a kitchen this peaceful." That made her laugh again, softer this time, but it lingered. There was something in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, something both curious and careful, as if she was trying to decide how much of herself to let me see. And in that easy quiet, between the rain, the warmth of her kitchen, and the unspoken pull between us, I realized I didn't want to go anywhere else. After we'd finished unpacking, she noticed the kitchen drawer sticking again, the one with the silverware. I offered to take a look, and before she could protest, I was already crouched beside it, tugging gently to see where it jammed. She stood close, watching. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but with a hint of amusement. "I don't mind," I told her. "It's just a loose track. Probably needs a screw tightened." She murmured, arms crossed loosely, leaning one shoulder against the counter. "You sound like you know what you're doing." I smiled. "A little. My dad made sure I could fix the basics before I moved out." "Good man," she said quietly. The drawer finally slid out, and I found the small screw that had come undone. She fetched a screwdriver from a small toolkit under the sink. When she handed it to me, her fingers brushed my palm, light, unintentional, but it made something in my chest tighten. I worked slowly, pretending to focus, though I was far more aware of her presence than of the drawer. I could feel her eyes on me, not in a way that made me nervous, but in a way that made me want to stand a little straighter, move a little slower. "There," I said at last, sliding the drawer back in. It moved smoothly now. She tested it, smiling when it didn't stick. "Perfect," she said. Then, with a little laugh that came out almost like a sigh, she added, "It's nice having a real man around." The words hung in the air between us, playful, but with something else under them. I glanced up at her. She was still smiling, but there was color in her cheeks. The kind that comes from realizing what you've just said and not quite wanting to take it back. I could have laughed it off. Maybe I should have. But instead, I just held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than I should have, and said quietly, "I'm glad I could help." Something changed then, subtle, but undeniable. The air in the room felt thicker somehow, the silence fuller. She stepped back, busying herself with a towel that didn't need folding. I stood and set the screwdriver aside, trying not to notice how my pulse had quickened. From the window, light rain was still falling, catching the glow of the street lamp outside. The world beyond the kitchen seemed muted, like it had drawn back to give us privacy. She looked at me again, a softer look this time, one that carried both gratitude and curiosity. "You're very kind," she said, almost in a whisper. I smiled faintly. "You make it easy." Her eyes held mine for a moment longer before she looked away, pretending to check the time. And in that quiet pause, I understood that something small had shifted, something that neither of us could unfeel, even if we tried. She offered me tea. Said it almost shyly, as though the idea surprised her the moment she voiced it. I nodded, pretending not to notice the faint nervousness in her tone. While she filled the kettle, I leaned against the counter again, watching the way the steam slowly began to curl up from the spout. The kitchen lights were dimmer now, the last traces of daylight had faded into the kind of dusk that makes everything quieter, softer. She moved with that same unhurried grace, setting out 2 cups, one slightly chipped at the rim. "Sorry," she said, noticing my glance. "That one's my favorite." I can't bring myself to throw it out. I smiled. The good ones always end up a little imperfect. That earned me a look, thoughtful, a little searching. She didn't answer right away, but I saw something flicker across her expression, as if the words had landed somewhere deeper than I intended. When the water boiled, she poured, the faint aroma of chamomile and honey filling the air. We sat at the small round table near the window, facing each other. Outside, the rain whispered steadily against the glass, wrapping the apartment in a kind of cocoon stillness. At first, we talked about ordinary things, the best coffee shop nearby, the stubborn tenant who always left his trash in the hallway, how this city never quite smelled clean after rain. But slowly, the conversation began to turn inward. She told me about her garden, about how she used to love tending it before life became too busy. I told her about my job, how sometimes the noise of it all made me crave quiet. Then, almost without warning, she grew thoughtful. Her eyes drifted to the window, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "You ever feel like time's moving faster than you can catch up to it?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yeah. Lately, all the time." She smiled faintly, still looking at the rain. "I used to think I'd have everything figured out by now. But life," she exhaled softly. "It has its own pace, doesn't it?" The quiet between us stretched, gentle but charged. I watched the way the soft lamplight touched her face, how the years hadn't dimmed her beauty, only deepened it. There was something magnetic in her composure, the way she carried her calm like a shield and a story at once. When she looked at me again, there was a hint of vulnerability in her eyes, something honest and open. "I don't usually talk like this," she said, almost apologetically. "I'm glad you did," I answered. "It's nice hearing you." Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile, one that made something in my chest tighten. She looked at me a moment longer, as if weighing whether to say more, then sipped her tea instead. The moment didn't need more words. The quiet spoke for us. The sound of rain, the warmth of the tea, the closeness of her presence, it all merged into one simple truth: I didn't want the night to end. I didn't realize how late it had gotten until I glanced at the clock on her wall, the hands just shy of 9. The rain had softened to a mist outside, turning the streetlights into blurry halos of amber. Time had slipped by unnoticed, as if it had been waiting patiently for us to stop pretending we weren't enjoying each other's company. "I should probably let you get some rest," I said softly. She looked up from her cup, her fingers resting loosely on the handle. "Oh," she murmured, a note of surprise in her voice, as if she hadn't expected the evening to end either. "Of course. I didn't realize how late it was." I stood slowly, not wanting to break the fragile calm that had wrapped around us. She followed me to the door, the soft rustle of her footsteps on the hardwood floor somehow louder than the rain outside. At the doorway, I turned to face her. "Thanks for the tea," I said. "And the company." Her smile was gentle, but there was something behind it, something that didn't fit neatly into politeness. "Thank you," she replied. "For helping. For staying." The air between us felt suspended. She stood only a few feet away, her hand resting against the doorframe. The lamplight from behind her painted her hair in warm tones of bronze and gold. I could see the soft rise and fall of her breath, the faint curve of her lips, the question lingering in her eyes, though neither of us dared to name it. Then she stepped closer. Not much, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint trace of her perfume threading through the air between us. "I can't remember the last time someone just helped without expecting anything," she said quietly. Her gaze dropped for a moment before returning to mine. "It's rare." Her voice had softened, her words carrying something unspoken, gratitude, maybe, but also a quiet longing she couldn't quite hide. Without thinking, I said, "You deserve that. Someone just being kind." For a second, neither of us moved. The silence felt alive, pulsing. Then, gently, she reached out, her hand resting on my forearm. It was a small touch, but it felt deliberate, meaningful. Her skin was warm, her fingers light, almost trembling. I didn't say anything. I just let the moment exist, the faint hum of the rain, the rhythm of our breathing, the unspoken understanding that something had changed. When she finally let go, her hand lingered an extra second, sliding away slowly, leaving behind a warmth that stayed long after her touch. She smiled, a little wistful, a little uncertain. "Good night," she whispered. I nodded. "Good night." As I stepped out into the hallway, the air felt cooler, quieter, but I carried her warmth with me, a silent echo of something neither of us had planned for, but both had clearly felt. The next day, the sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that makes the city feel slower, quieter. By late afternoon, the rain had returned, not a storm this time, just a steady, unhurried drizzle that blurred the edges of everything. I was walking back from the cafe down the street when I saw her again. She was standing by her car, one arm holding a small grocery bag to her chest, the other trying to wrestle open a stubborn umbrella. It wouldn't latch properly. Every time she thought it had, the canopy collapsed back on itself like it was teasing her. I didn't think, I just crossed the street. "You and umbrellas," I said, half laughing as I stepped up beside her. She startled for a second, then relaxed when she saw me. "Oh, you again," she said, her smile cutting through the grayness around us. "I swear, these things have a personal vendetta." "Here," I said, taking it gently from her hand. The metal frame clicked open on the first try. "Guess I got lucky." "Or maybe you just know what you're doing," she teased, echoing our conversation from the night before. I held the umbrella above her as we walked toward the building. The space beneath it was small, too small, which meant our shoulders brushed with every step. The air smelled of rain and something faintly sweet from the cafe down the street. She looked up at me once, her eyes softer now, no guard in them. "You didn't have to come out here," she said. "I know," I replied quietly. "But I wanted to." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she looked at me, that small, unspoken acknowledgement, was enough. When we reached the steps, I waited for her to go first. The umbrella tilted, sending a thin stream of rain down my sleeve, but I didn't care. She paused at the door, glancing back. "You're soaked," she said, laughing under her breath. "You should have stayed under more." I shrugged, grinning. "Worth it." She gave me a look, the kind that lasts a heartbeat too long, before reaching out and brushing a few drops of rain from my shoulder. Her hand lingered there, her touch soft but sure. "You're too kind for your own good," she said. "Or just stubborn," I replied. Her smile deepened. "I think I'm starting to like that about you." Something in her voice, playful, warm, but touched with honesty, made the air between us shift again. The rain, the closeness, the quiet understanding, it all folded into a single moment that felt far more intimate than words could handle. When we finally went inside, our footsteps echoed softly in the hallway. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. The silence was full enough, steady, familiar, and edged with something that felt like the beginning of belonging. The rain didn't last long that evening. By the time the sky began to clear, the scent of wet pavement and fresh air drifted through the open hallway windows. I had gone upstairs to drop off some mail that had been mistakenly placed in her box, at least, that's what I told myself. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to something softer, almost relieved. "Oh," she said, smiling. "You again." "Seems like I'm making a habit of this," I said, handing her the envelopes. She took them, glanced down, then looked up again, hesitating a little before saying, "You should stay for dinner this time." Her tone was casual, but her eyes gave her away, a quiet invitation, a hope she didn't want to sound like one. I almost said no, out of politeness, out of the strange fear that comes with wanting something too much. But then she smiled again, that small, knowing smile that seemed to undo every reason I could think of to leave. "All right," I said. Dinner sounds good. Inside, her apartment felt familiar now, like a place my thoughts already recognized. The soft music from her kitchen radio hummed in the background, the same station as before. She moved easily between the counter and the stove, barefoot, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen her before. "Can I help?" I asked. She nodded toward the cutting board. "You can start with the vegetables. I'll handle the pasta." We worked side by side, the kind of quiet teamwork that didn't need instruction. Occasionally our hands brushed as we passed ingredients, a tomato, a knife, a wooden spoon. Each time it happened, the air seemed to still for a heartbeat. At one point she laughed, shaking her head. "You chop like someone who doesn't cook often." "Guilty," I said, grinning. "Guess I'll need more lessons." Her laughter lingered longer this time. "We'll see about that." Dinner was simple, pasta, salad, a bit of wine. But as we sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, it felt like more than a meal. There was an ease between us now, built quietly over shared silences, brief glances, and the kind of understanding that doesn't require explanation. Halfway through, she set down her fork and looked at me for a long moment. "You know," she said softly, "it's been a while since this apartment felt alive." I met her gaze. Maybe it just needed someone to listen. She smiled, that real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. Then she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. The contact was small, but steady. Warm. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. The soft clinking of dishes, the faint hum of the radio, the glow of the lamplight, it all wrapped around us in a comfortable quiet. And as the evening deepened, I realized something simple and certain: I hadn't just helped her with groceries. Somehow, without meaning to, I'd helped her find a piece of warmth again, and in the process, she'd done the same for me.